I remember I was in an airport, and I think it was a Sunday evening. And he was calling to tell me that his daughter and her boyfriend had just eloped. And you could hear grief in his voice. And I knew the man pretty well. I know him pretty well. We've ministered together at various times. He's a good friend. His oldest child is unsaved. His second child is really not walking with the Lord at all, probably unsaved, and now his third child had eloped. And he was in great grief. He was just despondent. And I didn't know what to tell him. And I remember at the end of the phone call, he just said to me, he said this, "Matt, I'm a lousy parent. I'm just a lousy dad. I failed." And that was kind of how it ended. And truth be told, I've had more than one conversation like that. When I was in youth ministry, I met hundreds of parents and teenagers with stories of dysfunction, immoral behavior, abuse, and destructive choices. I have heard parents grieving over the sinful choices of their children. And I can tell you often, I've just felt unable to do anything. What do you say in a situation like that? I just remember thinking, I hope this never happens to me. One pastor who I really respect once remarked that if a parent with 4 children does not have at least one child walk away from the faith, then he's doing a really good job. And I thought, really? 75% counts as good? 75% is acceptable? 75% is a good job? That's satisfactory. And what's worse, I don't know that he's wrong. Christians all over are crying out for help. And what can be done? What does God give us to help us understand how to keep 25% of our children from turning away from God and following after Satan? And I'll just say this, there are no easy answers. I think this is why there are so many of these books and seminars, conferences on parenting and on the Christian family that claim if you follow these principles, if you just take these steps, 3 steps to a godly family, 4 key points to having a great Christian home, the 5-step formula to having a God-pleasing family. I think you find when you start trying to implement those, and I've been on that side saying, okay, what can I get out of this? What can I implement in my family? You find that often they just don't really work at all. And then you have people who don't have kids, who look at those who do, and they judge them for the way they're parenting their children. And you start to wonder, is there anything that can help me? I do know God gives wisdom. And this is something that I have grabbed a hold of over and over again in my adult life. The promise in James 1 that even though I lack wisdom, God promises to give it if I ask. And I have gone to him over and over again asking for his wisdom. And that promise is not just in James. It's really spread throughout the Bible. And here in Proverbs 1, as this great wisdom book is beginning to unfold, the very opening chapter, there is this cry, this call out for wisdom. To have God's wisdom, to think like God, to actually be able to look at your children and apply what God wants you to apply to their lives. And I think we can read through Proverbs and realize that there are 2 types of Christian families. I think you can either be a family that seeks God's wisdom or you can be a family that doesn't. And there it is. This really is the tale of two families. You can choose right now, tonight, at this moment, that your family will be a God's wisdom-seeking family. Or you can say, I'm going to follow somebody else's formula or plan. And I'm not saying that just making that decision will guarantee success. There's so many variables. We understand that children, as they grow older, become moral free agents. We understand that. But I do believe this is the closest thing you can get to any kind of guarantee. That if you follow after God as mom and dad, if you set a good example for your children, grandparents, if you decide as a single person that however God leads you in your life, whether it be at someday having a family and having children, if God leads you that way, you will pursue His wisdom. If this is how you set your face, this is the closest thing I can guarantee that you will be blessed in your walk with the Lord as you parent your children. And here you have in Proverbs 1 really a divide between those who want God's wisdom and those who don't. And I think we can apply this directly to the family. In fact, I want to apply it this way, that God, this is number one, God presents the possibility that family life can be relatively peaceful. He gives you that possibility. And this is because God's wisdom is ever available to those who desire it. Look at verse 20 again. What is wisdom doing? Wisdom is personified here as a woman who is standing out in public. And what is she doing? She's crying out. She's opening her voice. And where is she located? Look at her location. She's in the streets. She's in the marketplace. She's at the mall. She's also at the city gates. She's everywhere you turn. There's nowhere you can go in this world, if you're a child of God, if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, where God's wisdom isn't both crying out so that you can hear it and also ever available everywhere you turn. It's everywhere. No one can say at the end, well, I just didn't know. I didn't have the wisdom of God. It was hidden from me. It was clouded away. I couldn't see it. You can't say that. Because the way it's presented here is that wisdom is always there. The requisite knowledge and the ability to apply it is always there for you. If you want it, it's there. And yet wisdom asks this really pointed question. How long? How long will you ignore me? How long will you refuse to listen to me? How long will you go and not take advantage of what's available? To love being simple-minded, to delight in foolishness, to reject God's knowledge. Wisdom says, no, turn after me, obtain me, choose me. And wisdom says, if you do that, I'll pour out my Spirit upon you. I will give you everything you need to know how you must live your life and give you the ability to do that. You can know the words of wisdom. And he says at the end of the chapter, he says, and those who listen to me, what's the promise? Look at it. What's he say? Those who listen to me, verse 33, where do they dwell? In safety. And the parallel statement is, they're quiet from fear of evil. There's a safe harbor for your home. That lagoon, that quiet spot, that safe harbor is the place where you are listening to wisdom's words. Do you gather what he's saying here? Because when he talks about hearkening, it's more than just hearing the words. All right? Often, in fact, just recently, our family, we were driving. Becky shouts out the directions, and I'm not paying any attention at all. The words are in the room, in the car. They're floating through the air. They're there for my taking. I'm just ignoring them, right? I'm really not hearkening to her. And then she'll go, well, that was our turn. And I'm thinking, well, why didn't you tell me? But I did tell you. You weren't hearkening. I failed to hearken. What I should have been doing is actually saying, oh, she's giving me really important information. I need to listen to it. So it's more than just hearing it. It's actually saying, okay, it's something I need to do. I'm going to hear it and do it. I'm going to obey it. And when that happens, then he says, whoever hearkens to me dwells, makes his abode, he finds himself in a peaceful place. The one inevitably leads to the other. You listen to wisdom, you will get the benefits of being wise. You listen to folly, then you pay the price for following foolishness. Doing wise things results in safety. This is the place where there is no care, just comfort, complete security, confidence, hope, a place of rest, a quietness where no evil can harm you, no fears can alarm you. This is what God's wisdom provides. And I'm just going to say this, friends, it's available to you. You cannot, at the end of your life, stand before God and say, I didn't know. It wasn't available. I just didn't know which way to turn. Because God is saying here in Proverbs 1, it is here. You can't miss it. It's here. And so I think by way of application, I need you to just ask the question, is this what you're seeking after for your family? I'm not asking if you're going to seminars on parenting that some church in the area is offering. I'm not asking if you're buying the latest book that's being published and sold in the Christian bookstores or on Amazon.com. I'm not asking that. What I'm asking is, are you, as a family, actively seeking the wisdom of God? My brother-in-law, Nick, and his wife, Sarah, Becky's sister, Sarah, apparently ask God for wisdom all the time and do it in front of their kids, maybe during devotions or something. Because apparently a few weeks ago, as they were praying and having the children pray and they're little, my little niece, Lindsay, prayed with her face in the carpet, "Oh God, give me the wisdom." Where do you think she got that? Would your children pray that way? Would they? Would they pray, "God, give me the wisdom"? You can choose to seek it. Now, there's another choice here. Because remember, this is the tale of two families. You can be that family, or you can be a completely different family. And the worst part about this whole way Proverbs is written, it's a little bit difficult sometimes to comprehend, because there are no guarantees. Solomon is making life observations. He's not saying if you do this right, your children will guarantee to turn out right. And I'm going to tell you, there are a lot of people who've been terrible parents and had great kids. At least from the outside, they appear to be great. And so I'm not saying if you refuse to follow what I've said, your children are going to fall apart. Maybe not. But I can tell you, if you refuse God's wisdom, it's likely they will fall apart. And it's likely your family is going to struggle. And if you follow something other than God's wisdom, well, then this is number 2. God warns those who reject His wisdom. They're in danger of turbulence in family life. Those who reject God's wisdom will suffer for it. Because I have called, verse 24, wisdom says, because I have called and you refused, I stretched out my hand and you didn't regard, because ye have said it not my counsel and would none of my reproof. Do you see that? You refused wisdom's call, you ignored his hand for help, and you treated him with contempt. And how did you do that? How does someone do that? How does a Christian do that? By elevating things that other people have written above God's Word, by trying to follow formulas and strategies that people have come up with that they present at seminars above what the Bible teaches. Instead of saying, this is God's Word, this is the way, walk ye in it. Instead of doing that, I'm going to do it my own way. If you reject God's wisdom, well, the result is that wisdom will stand. The way the writer puts this is almost like wisdom is laughing and mocking, okay? He uses those terms. But I think what he's actually talking about is that wisdom stands as an example of what you could have had, but you chose not to have it. And now that you chose not to have it, it's like it's mocking you. It's making fun of you, almost. It's like when I play golf and I hit a bad shot. Once in a while, if I have an extra ball in my pocket, I throw it on the ground and I hit another shot. Now, usually, I hit the same bad shot I just hit. But once in a while, I hit a really good shot. And now I have to go find my first shot because you can't take the second shot. That's how our president plays. You can't play that way, okay? He's not alone. A lot of evangelists do too, by the way. Yeah. Now I got to go find my first shot, and I get up on the green like 5 strokes later, and that ball's sitting there making fun of me. It could have been me. I could have been your shot, putting for eagle, but no. Right? It's mocking me by sitting there. Wisdom sits here and says, you could have listened. I gave you every chance. I gave you the opportunity. You wouldn't listen. I had my hand out, and you just passed on by. I would have helped you. You wouldn't listen to my call. You treated me as contemptible. Okay? Now, when everything bad happens, at your calamity and your fear comes as a desolation. You see this? He augments fear. It comes as a desolation, your destruction like a whirlwind, distress. You almost get the sense of a horrible storm. When that storm finally hits, and wisdom stands there and said, all this time, I could have been yours and you wouldn't. You wouldn't take advantage of me. This is kind of the awful thing about parenting. You don't really know how you're doing for a long time. You get in those early years and you get into routines, and I hope you're thinking, I guess I'm doing right by my children. I'm trying my best. These are kind of expressions we use. But I'm going to tell you, you know and God knows if you really are pursuing His wisdom in leading those little ones, because, let me tell you, someday everyone will know. You can't hide it. It all comes out. 15, 20, 30 years later. It all comes out. And it doesn't mean if they turn out rotten that you failed necessarily. And it doesn't mean if they turn out great that you were some great parent. Remember, it's not guarantees. But if you do not follow after God's wisdom, the likelihood is they'll fail. And if you do follow God's wisdom, the likelihood is they will succeed. So why wouldn't you play the percentages and go after God? Why would you let wisdom sit there as a spectator and say, you could have had me, but you would not? What's worse? Solomon writes, not only will wisdom laugh at your calamity, but when the calamity comes, look at verse 28, then you won't know where to turn. You see, because if you aren't in a habit of turning to God's wisdom now, you won't turn to God's wisdom when troubled times come. I tell people this all the time, especially in a counseling situation. What do you do when you get into crisis? What do you do? I'm embarrassed to say this. I am. Because I don't pray nearly as much as I should, but I really pray hard when I lose something. I should pray a lot more than I do, but I really pray when I lose something. And the other day, we were leaving Washington, and I told my wife, I cannot find my Ozempic 10. It's for my diabetes, it's medication. It costs $1,000 a month. The insurance cost me $25. But I called the pharmacist on the week we searched high and low, couldn't find it. I looked everywhere, thought I had, anyway. And And I called the pharmacist on the way home, and he said, look, I lost my medication. It's very expensive. I'm guessing they're not going to want to pay for it, and I really don't want to pay for this. Is this going to hurt me if I stop taking it for a month because I had a month supply? Is this going to hurt me? I need information. And he said, we're going to need to call your doctor. He said, I'm going to tell you. And he asked me the prescription. He said, that's really expensive. I doubt they're going to want to pay for it. There's something called a lost prescription override and all. He was throwing in words that are English, but I didn't understand any of them. So I just kind of went, oh yeah, all right. Sounds good. Yeah, great. I'll call my doctor then because I don't understand you anymore. We have to stop talking because you're not making any sense. To you make sense. To me, I was lost. And I got home and it was late and I had a lot to do and I went to bed. And the next day I got up and I started looking, and a place I had looked 3 or 4 times, there it was. Now, I'll just confess, I've been praying and praying and praying and praying. Lord, please help me find this. Please help me find this. Please help me find this. Where do you turn when trouble comes? A Christian's first prayer should be to God. Before you tell your spouse, or before you tell a friend, or before you post it on social media, your first prayer should be to God. Every time. And it shouldn't be an embarrassment of saying, well, I came to you, Lord, 3 days ago with problems, and there I just keep dumping my problems on God. What do you think He wants from you? He loves hearing from you. He loves it when you dump your problems on Him. And so you come to Him and say, Lord, I need your help. But these people, it says, they'll call upon me and I will not answer. He's not talking about God. This isn't a Christian calling upon God and God won't answer. This is a person who's ignored wisdom all his life, then now saying, I need wisdom, and not knowing where to find it. He put it on the shelf so long ago, and so many things have been piled on top of it, and so many years have passed that now, after all these years, when calamity comes, he says, I don't know where to go. Wisdom, I can't hear any longer. So he says, they'll seek me but not find me, because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord. They would none of my counsel. They despised my reproof. Do you see what he's saying? Because for all of those years, they said, I don't want it. I don't want to hear the way to follow after God. I think I'm doing a pretty good job all by myself. He says, when you have that happen, and you turn to God, or you turn to wisdom, and you need wisdom, you're going to have trouble finding it. Because it's not going to be crying in the streets anymore. And it's not going to be holding out its hand anymore. It's going to be gone. And the end result is the fruit of foolishness. They eat the fruit of their own way. Can I say this, Mom and Dad? Whatever you sow in your family, you reap in your grandchildren. Whatever you sow in your children, in your family, you will reap in your grandchildren. You will. If you sow good things, you'll reap good things. If you sow foolish things, you'll eat the fruit of your own foolishness. That's what he says here. They will eat the fruit of their own way. It's just a spiritual law. They'll be filled with their own devices, and for the turning of the way of the simple shall slay them, and the prosperity of fools shall destroy them. The fruit of the way they will eat, the folly of their actions they will experience. And the end result is no true success. Billy Sunday had a sermon that was really famous that he used to preach. And it was really interesting to read. In fact, I have it in my office, a biography on Sunday that's a pretty good read. And the sermon is included there. But Billy Sunday, he was a baseball player. He got saved, and he wanted to serve the Lord. He quit baseball. Could have been a great baseball player, maybe a Hall of Famer kind of thing. He played with Hall of Famers on the Chicago White Stockings. And Sunday was an outfielder. He's very fast, stole a lot of bases. And the players on his team were really well known at the time. I want you to think about, it'd be something like taking it from today's modern sports vernacular, somebody really important on a team, maybe a lesser known player, but still a good player, getting saved, leaving that sport, and going out to preach. But Sunday didn't know how to preach, so he went and worked for the YMCA, back when it was really a youth men's Christian organization, when the C part really meant something. Back then, Sunday would go, and R.A. Torrey, I think it was, took him under his wing, the great preacher, and helped Sunday develop 7 sermons. And he would preach those 7 sermons, and that was all he had. And then he would go somewhere else and preach those 7 sermons over again. And he really became an evangelist doing that. He had just a stable of sermons and didn't have anything much more than that. He wasn't an expositor, wasn't a great Bible teacher, but he was really good speaker. And he had this one sermon that he gave, and it was really powerful because here's what he did. He talked about a time in his life when he came to Christ. And he said there was a person that was preaching on a street corner in Chicago, and he decided that day to follow after Christ, hearing that man speak and preach. And then he talks about all the people who were with him, all the people in his life. And they were all famous players. The catcher from the team, who was Hall of Famer. I can't remember the names, and you wouldn't know them because these are really old Hall of Famers. If you have their baseball cards, you're a multimillionaire, that kind of thing. Long time ago, right? But he would say that guy was there on that street corner, and then he would give the story of that guy's life and how he did really well, and he ended up really important in baseball. But then after baseball, his life kind of fell apart, and there was a lot of alcohol and a lot of abuse and spousal abuse, and then his marriage fell apart, family fell apart, and he ended up drinking himself to death. And then he would say at the end, now who did better on that day on the street corner, me or him? And that was how he would do. And his whole sermon was just a series of stories like this. And he decided on that day to follow after Jesus, and then those people didn't. And he went through all of these really famous people that everybody knew, and he talked about them, and then he said, who did better, me or him? And then the end of the sermon, of course, is, why don't you make the same decision I made? It's a good sermon. And I was thinking about Sunday's sermon when I was working on this, because I was thinking, how many parents, good Christian parents, sit through messages like this one? Lots of them in your life. How many of these will you sit through? Hundreds. You'll hear lots of sermons on Christian parenting. But how many really say, I will follow after God's wisdom? I could sit here tonight and do the same thing that Sunday did, and I could take you back to my childhood, to friends I had growing up. We went to a really good Christian school. Our parents went to really good Bible preaching churches. We had all the advantages you could possibly have. And I could take you to many of them today. And they are not following Christ. And they do not love the Lord. And they do not go to church. And they're probably unsaved. And I could take you to them and I could say, why did it happen? And I can't say 100% it's because their parents decided not to follow wisdom. That's not what I can say. But I can say this. It makes me wonder. Because this says, follow after wisdom. And you will have relative safety and relative peace. Follow after your own foolishness, and you will eat the fruit of it. So in conclusion, I'm saying to all of you parents, will you decide? There's no application beyond this. I'm not giving you any step. If you say, well, what's the next step, Pastor? What do I do next? I don't have a next step, okay? This isn't a formula. If it were a formula, I'd have another step. I'd have 2 more steps and a really good illustration at the end, and we'd all go forward and get saved again, right? That's kind of how it works. But I don't have that. I just have this. Will you choose to say, I want God's wisdom in my family? Will you say that in your heart? Will you say to your spouse this week, that's what I really want. I want God's wisdom in my family. I really want it. For all of you children who are here, all of you children, will you say in your heart, I want God's wisdom in my life. I want God's wisdom for me. The application here is general. It doesn't have to be about families. We've been talking about families, but it's a general application. Will you children say, I want God's wisdom in my life? The choices I make, the decisions as I go forward. I want to pursue after God. Will you grandparents say, I want to set an example for my children as they parent their children of God's wisdom instead of this is what we did. I'm going to tell you, if I have another person tell me this is what they did, it doesn't matter. Every child is different. I can tell you what I did. It will have no bearing unless we're talking about really generic things. This is the way we closed our car door. I guess you could make, there's how many ways to close a car door? I'm just making this up on the fly, so kind of follow with me here, this line of illustration. I'm just saying, you take something really basic and generic, maybe you could say this is the way we did it, but I'm just telling you that if it's family stuff and it's dealing with a child with a unique psyche and all the different variables of a child and personality, I don't care how you did it, and you shouldn't really care how I did it. It's really going to be quite different. Even within your own family, I bet it's different, especially if you have a lot of kids. You can probably tell. Each child is unique. So instead of telling me how you did it, tell me what you did to seek God's wisdom, or tell me what you're doing now to seek God's wisdom. You grandparents, will you go to your children and say, I want you to be wise in rearing up your children for Christ. I want you to be wise. And will you singles? There are a few of you who are single in here. Will you just say, look, I want God's wisdom in my life. It may not be marriage. It may not be a home. But I want God's wisdom. Wherever I go, however I turn, I want to follow after God. It's a tale of two families here. You can be a family that says, I want the wisdom of God, or you can be a family that just says, take it or leave it. For me, for my family, I want God's wisdom every time. Let's pray. Lord, this is what we need.